Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. There'll be no June swoon as we introduce the newest month and get you set for a couple of finals, baseball, tennis, and whatever else the sports world has cooking, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now the stages have been set. The finals will begin this week, Wednesday and Thursday, NHL, NBA, respectively, and there is a lot to unpack. Storylines, predictions, etc. But for the NBA fan, I'm going to hold off my prediction until Thursday's podcast. Of course, game one being Thursday night in Oklahoma City. Pacers and the Thunder. And of course, I'm going to unpack how the Pacers got there. I'll also talk about the Knicks as well. But because the Stanley Cup Final begins on Wednesday night, and I'm sure maybe some out there come on, JAYREELZ, I want to hear what you got to say about the Pacers, the series, even the Knicks for that matter. I'll get to that, doing a little bit of a role reversal as I want to start off with the hockey. And obviously you have a part two of the Stanley Cup rematch from last year to this year between the Oilers and Panthers. And this is one that I've anticipated and was hoping for, because even going back to the beginning of the playoff, despite the fact that I had Dallas going a long way, and I'm going to touch on them in a little bit, so you want to stay tuned for that, for the 5 Dallas Stars fans outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But when it comes to this Cup final, there are plenty of storylines. There's so much to unpack here. And even before I get to that, I want to start off with the Edmonton Oilers, because when they concluded their series on Thursday night, a Game 5 in Dallas, to where I thought the Stars were going to get this series back to Edmonton, considering that they're a team, third straight conference final, as I've talked about for weeks on end, and a team that a lot of people thought were going to be the front runner to come out of the West. And when you look at their trajectory, that 7-game series against Colorado, which was not only just a tough series for them, obviously, but also on top of that, having to come from behind in the fashion that they did in that third period in order for them to get past the Avalanche and then have to play the Winnipeg Jets, who by regular season standards was the best team in the sport. And they dusted them off in 5 games. And right away, I said to myself, well, if Edmonton is going to come out of this, it's probably going to be a long series, 7-game series at best. And with the Stars having the home ice, I thought to myself that with the way that they've played here in this postseason, chances are they're going to get to a Cup final. And what did we see? We saw them in 5 games go exit stage left into the spring and summer. And again, I'm going to unpack the Stars in a second, but all the credit in the world goes to the Edmonton Oilers to get back to this point after that bitter defeat in Game 7 after being down 0-3 in the Stanley Cup Final to the Panthers. And of course, that's one of the storylines there, which I will unravel in a little bit. But for Edmonton, they got off to a tremendous start, 3-0 in the game. Actually, it was 2-0 before Peter DeBoer, the coach of the Stars, pulled Jake Ottinger, the goaltender. And right away, you thought that was a panic move. You said to yourself, wait a minute, why is he doing this now? And even though you had a scenario where the backup came in and he did give up a goal and made it 3-0, but then the Stars made their way back. Jason Robertson, who had a couple of solid games to end the playoff with a goal in Game 4 as well as here in Game 5. Then you had Rupe Hintz, who, remember, was injured early on in that series and came back and was able to chip in with a goal in his own right. So they made it 3-2. And you thought to yourself, all right, they're going to need that next goal to tie and see if they could get the lead in order for them to get on a plane to go back to Edmonton. But every time they got close, that's when Edmonton took the next goal. So whether it was 4-2 and then they made it 4-3, and then for the Stars to get that much more closer, but then the Oilers just had too much in their gas tank for them to get the goal to make it 5-3, and then they end up winning 6-3, and that's all she wrote as far as the Edmonton Oilers are concerned. So I'll start there with what Edmonton has done here in this postseason has been utterly phenomenal. I mean, think about this. They started their trek to the Stanley Cup Final, losing the first two games to the LA Kings in LA before coming home to not only win the next two, but they ended up winning the next four. Next round, where they went up against Vegas, they beat them in 5 games. And then here in this series, after losing game 1, and in pretty tough fashion. Remember, they had a 3-1 lead going into the third period. Now, mind you that the Stars were on a power play, but they cashed in on that power play early third period, and then just an undisciplined play by the Oilers to where they gave up 2 power play goals pretty much in the span of 5 minutes. And a 3-1 lead in the third turned out to be a 4-3 and a 5-3 victory by the Stars. And that's when you thought, well, Edmonton is going to be on the ropes. Edmonton is going to rue the day that they had a Game 1 victory. Looked like it was going to be in their back pocket. And then all of a sudden, it just imploded on them. But what did they do from that point on? They won the next 4 games. And in pretty much dominating fashion. Whether it was Stuart Skinner coming back in net and pitching shutouts. Whether it was blowouts there in Game 3 where they won 6-1. And obviously in a Game 5 when they jumped out to a 3-0 lead and they weren't going to relinquish that cushion that they had, similar to what happened there in Game 1 where they had a 2-goal lead going into the third. And even though it was 3-0 after the first period, and then you saw the Stars come back with the 2 goals, but Evander Kane was not going to have it as he got the big goal that set them up for a series-clinching win. And the Oilers are now back here in this Cup Final to go up against the Panthers, which we talked about there on Thursday's podcast as they sealed the deal against the Hurricanes last week. And with all of the storylines that I'll get into in a matter of seconds when it comes to what Edmonton and what they're going to have to face and some parallels dating back 40, 41 years ago. So I'm going to unpack that in a second. But as far as the Stars go, this has to be a bitter loss. Here's a team that has been to 3 straight conference finals. And obviously, I just mentioned their whole trajectory to get to a Game 5 there in Dallas. And I'm sorry, when you outlast the Avalanche in the first round, which was obviously tooth and nail, and when you beat the best team in the sport in the second round and do it pretty much in convincing fashion, winning in 5, and on top of that, win Game 1 in the way that they did, you would have thought that the Stars would have won this. Let's say, give Edmonton 2 games, it would have been a 6-game series. And from that point on, they did not capitalize. They did not have another shot to where it looked like they were going to be in this series because Edmonton just dominated from that point on. And never once did you think that the Stars threatened the Oilers to even a point where this was going to be a series. And other than that first game, it's just mind-boggling to think and really puzzling that the team, I don't want to go as far as saying they were a no-show, and obviously they had some bad games in the series, but they were not even a threat to Edmonton. And this is where the coach, Peter DeBoer, and even the players on that team, and have very good players. You know, the Jamie Benns and the Jason Robertsons, and I get it, Mikko Rantanen was an invisible man. Not only in the latter part of that Winnipeg series, but throughout this whole 5-game stretch because he did not score a goal in that series against Edmonton. And then Jake Ottinger, Game 7, I don't know if he had jitters or butterflies to give up 2 goals on 2 shots. And then had to bring him the backup. I mean, this was just a complete nightmare and a collapse for a Stars team that, what more can you do? You have the players. You have obviously a very good goaltender in Ottinger, a coach who has been to the Stanley Cup Finals in the past and won Peter DeBoer. And now you have to sit and think, if you're the brass of the Dallas Stars, if you're the front office, I mean, what do we do next? Do we fire DeBoer? Does the GM have to go? Do we have to shake it up and trade some players? I don't want to make this out to be a Toronto Maple Leafs situation, but this is one that is, I'm not going to say set the franchise back, but for so many times that they've gotten close to the mountaintop, meaning just to a Stanley Cup final, they've been knocked down back to the bottom of the hill. And this is another scenario where the Stars are still formidable, but for whatever the reason, there's an ingredient that's missing there for this team to get themselves to that next level. What that is right now, I couldn't tell you. Maybe it's a situation where they have to bring in a guy or two that has some Stanley Cup championship experience. And mind you, this team has had a very good run over the years, considering that they went to a Cup final at the start of the decade against Tampa and the aforementioned 3 Western Conference finals in a row. But it has amounted to absolute squat. Zero, zilch, nothing. So where do they go from here? I don't know. And I don't see them this time next year unless they make whether radical changes or just a couple of wholesale moves in order for them to get to a Stanley Cup final. But other than that, they're going to be in the same point next year with the conference finals there, and everybody's going to be pumped up and ready to go. And for what? To lose in 5, 6, or 7 games, or maybe even get swept next year, considering they've gone backwards? Who knows? But the Stars certainly have a lot of work to do, considering how talented they are and how much success that they've had here over this 5-6 year run. But that success have not meant a championship or even getting to a Stanley Cup Finals with the pandemic year notwithstanding. So where do they go? We'll see as we get deeper into the summer, where summer will officially begin in about 2.5 weeks. But, we'll have our eyes on what they're going to do when the free agency period begins a month from now. Now, as far as the Stanley Cup Final goes, again, we've seen this before. Obviously, last year, we talked about the Panthers getting out to that 3-0 lead, and then Edmonton came roaring all the way back to a Game 7 where they lost 2-1 in Sunrise. And that was obviously a bitter pill for them to swallow, knowing that they made the journey all the way back from being in the depths and in the abyss where they were on the verge of getting swept. But that Game 4 in Edmonton, I believe they won 8-1, and that breakout game turned the series around. But to the point where it did get them back to a Game 7 in Florida, but obviously it was all for naught. Now this year, the home ice does belong to Edmonton, so at least they'll have that to work with, knowing that if they get off to a good start here in the series, up 2-0, they know that they can control their own destiny by just winning the home games. But we know that Florida, they are rock solid. They're a defending Cup champ, and they've been back here now for the 3rd straight year. I had 2 fingers up if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. 3, count them 3 there, JAYREELZ. And for the storylines to go into this Stanley Cup Final, the one thing, I'll start with Edmonton, the revenge factor. Now that they've gotten back to this point, knowing what happened last year, is there any bit of revenge? And remember, toward the end of that series last year, Leon Draisaitl was injured. He wasn't the same player. Obviously did not score a bunch of goals. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't even think he scored in the final 3 games of that series, 5, 6, and 7. So now you would think he's relatively healthy. I'm sure this is probably going to burn inside of him, knowing the opportunity that they had last year and how he did not come up with any big goals and fell short. I'm sure that that's been sitting with him dating back to last year. And for him, I'm sure that this is certainly going to be a revenge tour for one Leon Draisaitl. And the same for Connor McDavid for that matter, although he was the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for the playoff MVP. But the last thing that he wants on that mantle, he's gotten all the hardware that any player could ever imagine. The scoring trophies, the MVPs, even the MVP of a playoff in which he lost. Now he just needs to hoist the Holy Grail, the best trophy in all of sports, over his head, whether it's in 4, 5, 6, or 7 games. And that's the only thing that's missing from the resume of a one Connor McDavid. The other thing about Edmonton, not only just with the revenge factor, but the other thing is that have they learned their lesson playing against this team, which hasn't really changed that much? We know Brad Marchand, obviously a big ingredient and a cog into that machine or that wheel that the Florida Panthers are. But one of the other storylines that I have, if you're Edmonton, is being able to finesse their way, as much as they are a finesse team, but how they're going to power their way through this team. Now, we've seen them in this postseason, especially over the last 14 games after going down 0-2 to LA. They are 12-2 in their last 14 playoff games. Now, does that continue? Can they find that mix of grit, toughness, and even power to get through a Panther lineup, which, as we all know, is stout, is championship ready, and they know all the ways that it takes to win a championship? Are they going to be able to match that? Because they're not going to be able to try to weave their way through traffic. They're going to have to try to run over some people. They're going to have to try to crash the boards. This may not be the Edmonton Oilers style, but they're going to have to try to do that in order to win a cup. And that's the thing that I'm curious about, knowing what they learned from last year, especially over the course of not only just the final 3 games or 4 games, which got them back in the series and to play in a Game 7, but what did they learn from those first 3 games? Because Edmonton seemed to be outmatched in those games, despite the fact that the scores were relatively close. So to me, what did the Oilers learn from last year as they head into this Cup final with the home ice on their side? And on top of all that, with Draisaitl as well as McDavid, the two leaders of the team, how they're going to be able to manage that, their emotions, etc., as they try to win a cup. And then the third storyline that I have, and it's a huge one, is the goaltender. Stuart Skinner has been marvelous here ever since he returned from injury after missing that second round against Vegas where Calvin Pickard picked up from where Skinner left off in the LA series. And what is he going to be able to do? Because you know that the Panthers are going to crash the net. You know that they're going to be physical. You know they're going to try to do whatever it takes to get him rattled. And unfortunately, Stuart Skinner is not Ken Dryden. Or he's not even Grant Fuhr or Andy Moog. Look those two guys up. And if you're Edmonton Oilers fans, you know what I'm talking about. So Skinner, he's going to have to maybe not stand on his head, but there's going to be some close games here. And even if they're not close, is it going to be a scenario where the coach, Chris Knobloch, is he going to have to pull Skinner? Because let's say if he's off his game and he's not sharp, is this going to be a scenario where the coach is going to have to maybe go to his backup a lot sooner? And that's going to be a very interesting dynamic because for as well as Stuart Skinner has played, now the spotlight and the stakes are even higher. And we've seen Skinner there, of course, last year in the Cup final. But now this is also his redemption to see if he can secure 4 wins here over the course of the next couple of weeks to win that Stanley Cup. And then the flip side, to me, the only big storyline I have with the Panthers is because this is their 3rd straight year. How much wear, tear, we know about their mental and their even spiritual toughness. They are a team that plays on emotion. Obviously, they're a very physical team, and they love the forecheck. The old saying, forecheck, backcheck, paycheck. I get it. I've said that a million times here over the last few weeks if you listen to the podcast. But with that being said, I know that the Panthers are a team that they're going to go where their leaders go, whether it's Makachuk, Alexander Barkov. You want to say to a lesser degree because he just got there, Brad Marchand. Remember, he did win a cup back in 2011 with the Bruins. So he knows his way around winning. But this team has the pedigree. They've been now to 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals. But is that a blessing or is it going to be a curse? Considering that how much more gas is left in the tank. And people can say, well, JAYREELZ, they're in a cup final. What do you expect? They're just all of a sudden just going to peter out? They're all of a sudden just going to surrender and not play to their capability the way they have over the last couple of years? Of course, I understand that. But at the same time, these runs, sometime they could sneak up on you and get you. And with Edmonton, with their 12-2 record coming into this series, and I get it that the Panthers could have swept the Hurricanes in the previous round, and we know what happened in the 7-game series against Toronto after them coming back from that 3-2 deficit. Or as a matter of fact, they were up 3-2. They lost that Game 6 in Florida, where they had to go back to Toronto and win a Game 7. So nobody's going to question whether or not that they have the guts, the grit, the determination, none of it. The Panthers have proven over the last 3 years that this is a team to be reckoned with. But with all of that, games played, a lot of the pressure that is on the shoulders of this organization, and granted, nobody's going to confuse the Florida Panthers with the Montreal Canadiens, with the New York Rangers, the Boston Bruins, the non-original 16. The team has been around for 32, 33 years. But now there's a standard there in South Florida, and they know that they can be a team that in winning back-to-back cups to go along with all the other teams that have done so, and they could just look right up the state as the last team to win back-to-back cups, them being the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they want to be a part of that discussion. So how I look at it is that I don't think they're going to run out of gas in this round, but there is a possibility that if Edmonton jumps out to a 2-0 lead, and yes, we did see that in the Toronto series where the Panthers were trailing going back to South Florida. But does Edmonton turn on the Jets? Have they found a switch, not only just a gear to take their game to the next level, but to the point where, yes, we understand what it takes. We know, we've learned from last year, and now that everything seems to be running smoothly in Edmonton to where you have the Panthers on their heels, it could happen. And let me take you to yesteryear, because one thing I thought about over the last week was the last time that the Edmonton Oilers were in a scenario where they played in back-to-back cups against the same team. You got to go back to 1983 and 84, where the Edmonton Oilers, the young upstart team, Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Paul Coffey, all of the All-World and Hall of Famers that were on that team prior to their dynasty run there in the 80s. And the Islanders, speaking of which, had a dynasty in their own right after winning 3 straight Stanley Cups and playing in a 4th Stanley Cup in the 82-83 season. And with Billy Smith leading the charge for a Conn Smythe Trophy and a 4th straight Stanley Cup by the New York Islanders, they swept the Edmonton Oilers in that year to where they got their 4th straight Stanley Cup. And then in the following year, you had the rematch between the Islanders and Oilers. And this is what I mean, people. Now, granted, they were going for 5. That was the year, if you recall, Islander fans, which, although it was a million years ago, the Islanders drive for 5. They were trying to match the Montreal Canadiens of the late 50s to win 5 straight Stanley Cups. And even though they lost a tough game 1 to the Edmonton Oilers in their building, and that was the first year, the 2-3-2, I might add. 2 home games, 3 road, and 2 home. Of course, they switched that since then. But with the Islanders losing game 1 and Kevin McClellan with that goal from the corner, and I actually interviewed Kevin McClellan many years ago. You got to go back in the archives to check that out. So please, maybe I'll leave a link on that in the description. But with the Oilers winning game 1 and then the Islanders did win game 2 in convincing fashion, it was the next 3 games in Edmonton where they took over. And they literally took the hearts out of the Islanders' chest. They did not have an answer for the aforementioned players there on Edmonton. And before you know it, I believe it was May 19th, 1984. I'll never forget it. I believe it was a Saturday night where Wayne Gretzky raised the cup over his head for the first time and they beat the Islanders in 5 games. And a lot of that could have been the drive for 5. It wore on them. It were a long series. Remember, they were down 0-2 prior to that, the Islanders, to the Canadiens, and they won 4 straight after that, leading into the Stanley Cup Final. And they were never able to make it back to Long Island to even play in a Game 6. So the series was over and Edmonton won. Could that be a carbon copy? Now, I understand that the Panthers didn't sweep the Oilers last year the way the Islanders did so to Edmonton yesteryear, but it's a situation where the parallels are there. Playing back-to-back, the Islanders got the best of them the first go-around, and then they paid the price the second go-around for the Islanders, where the Oilers were just dominant and beat the Islanders in that second cup. Could that happen this time around? Quite possibly. Now, let me get to a couple of keys and then my prediction before I go on to the NBA. Now, of course, health is huge, as we all know. If Leon Draisaitl, who was hurting last year in the end of that series, did not score, that's going to be big. These guys are going to suit up. These guys are going to play. These opportunities, as we all know, do not come every day. And I really, truly believe that one of the big keys here, obviously the goaltender Stuart Skinner, is going to be enormous to go up against Sergei Bobrovsky. And we know that his recent track record and what he's been able to do. The Oilers are going to have to try to thwart the onslaught of the Panthers. They're going to come at you in waves, as you know. They have game players. They have gutty players. Mentioned the Matthew Tkachuks and the Alexander Barkovs, but it's the Carter Verhaeghes. It's even the Seth Jones, who they got there at the deadline, and defense, who's had a tremendous playoff. It's guys like that. So it's not even just the stars that you got to contend with or deal with. It's the other players that certainly rise to the occasion when the money's on the line. And Verhaeghe is a guy that is very underrated in the sport, and I get it, maybe not so much because of his prowess in the postseason and his penchant to get these big-time goals, as we talked about there last week when he got the killer goal against the Hurricanes in that decisive Game 5. But to me, it's how the Oilers are going to withstand that. And if the Panthers are going to apply that pressure and keep the McDavids and the Draisaitl's and the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins at bay, this is where the Panthers will thrive. And how I look at it is that if they're going to do that, the Panthers are going to go off to a good start. And I'm sure they're going to look at this saying that we just need to get one game, try to get back home and take the home ice from the Oilers and have them go uphill, similar to what they did last year, to maybe the Panthers get out to a 3-1 series lead and have the Oilers floundering. But with those two things, whether it's Skinner and the physical play, I really believe that this is the time for Edmonton. Based on their recent play, the 12-2 record in the last 14 games, to me, I think they're on a mission. Those guys, I'm sure they're keeping it close to the vest, knowing that they have learned from years past. And just look at this playoff. 0-2 to the LA Kings. They came back and won that series. The series against the Golden Knights, well, a lot of people thought Vegas was going to win. I picked them to win in 6, and they disposed of them in 5 games. And then the Stars, after losing a crushing game 1, they won the next 4. I think this is their time. I think this is going to be a long series, though. Could I see Edmonton win in South Florida in a game 6? I could absolutely see that. But something tells me this is going to go the distance. You're going to have another 7-gamer just like last year. But when it's all said and done, I think the Edmonton Oilers will hoist the cup. McDavid will finally exalt and exhale to win his first Stanley Cup championship for a guy that absolutely deserves it, considering his back of his hockey card and everything that he's meant to the sport since he came into the league, what is it, about 10 years ago. Edmonton in 7, that's my choice. You know the Panthers are going to be a tough out. They're going to be feisty, and they're going to show why they're champions, but I think they're going to come up short as the Oilers, I predict, will win in 7 games. And quick, just a couple of notes. Former Islander coach Lane Lambert lands his feet in Seattle as the next coach of the Kraken, and then the Islanders will retain, speaking of which, Patrick Waugh, when you had the new GM and hockey ops there in a one. Matthew, what's his name? I can't even remember his name right now. This is what happens when you're recording here without a safety net. But the new GM of the Islanders, that's a terrible job on my part because I know that they just got him from the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I want to say Ducharme. I know that's not his name. But the GM of the Islanders is going to retain Patrick Waugh. Matthew Darsh, thank you. I knew it was with a D, but I couldn't figure out, or his name wasn't coming to me right away. Obviously, it's not a household name. So Waugh's going to stay there on the island for next year at least, and hopefully the Islanders get some success on top of bringing in some players to get themselves relevant in the Eastern Conference. All right, so now let me turn my attention to the NBA. A couple of things to tack on here when it comes to the finals, but first off, I have to recount the journey by the Pacers. We all know that when we were on the airwaves here Thursday, it was about to be a Game 5 where the Pacers, as I put on my high tops, by the way, the Pacers going into the Garden, and they were a complete no-show. They might as well should have stayed in Indiana, considering that they only scored 94 points in the game. The Knicks led wire to wire. Jalen Brunson, 34 points. And with Karl-Anthony Towns and company, they put forth their best offensive game in the series. I understand early in the series they scored 135 points in Game 1, etc. But this was one that was the rocking chair game that they needed. And you thought, and at least I felt, that they were going to go out like that because if they lost in Game 6, and obviously we know now that they did, but I didn't think they were going to lose Game number 5. I felt as if with everything that had transpired, especially after that Game 4 in Indiana, that they were going to come home, take care of business, and then it was just a matter of how the Knicks were going to perform in Game 6, whether that meant that they were just going to not be at their best and fall short, or have a Herculean effort, which was what the doctor would have wanted the Knicks to order, because there was no way that they were going to play anything less than what they are capable of. And you saw that there on Saturday night, to where the Pacers, although only up by 4 at the half, but right out of the gate, they had that 8-0 run. They had a 12-point lead, and they pretty much managed that until the very end when they ended up winning by 17, 125 to 108. And for the Pacers, just a tremendous job by them. We knew, or at least I did, after that performance there Thursday night at Madison Square Garden, there was no way that they were going to be anything less than what they have been in that building for the most part. And for them, if they would have put up a stinker there, to me, that would have been very damning for them, because they would have had to get on a plane to come back to New York and play in a Game 7, which, you know, that building would have been just raucous, but at the same time would have been very tense. So I don't want to hear the Knicks fan would have thought automatically that the Knicks would have won that game, but obviously we'll never know about that. But when it comes to the Pacers, second time in history that they made it to the finals. Of course, in 2000, they made it to the finals where they lost to the Lakers in 6. And for the performances that they got there in a game number 6, where Pascal Siakam had 31, Tyrese Halliburton with 21 and 13, which after that game 5, he only scored 8 points in the game, was a non-factor. But for Indiana, they deserved it. They had a tremendous run, a magical run to get to this point. And for them, they deserve, I mean, what more can you say? They were the best team in the East. And granted, they were a 4 seed. But with their talent, with their depth, and obviously with the head coach there, Rick Carlisle, they were going to be a tough out. And I even said that in the Cleveland series. And this is talking about a Cleveland team that won 64 games. And a lot of people thought it was going to be Boston-Cleveland in a conference final. And was that the omen for bad things to come? As we know, it was anything but that. So for the Pacers, congratulations. Just a great job. Credit all around their organization to get to this point. And for the Knicks, it was a magical run in their own right. We know what had taken place, the 6-game series, winning 3 road games in Detroit. Those 2 big wins in Boston to start off the series, and which the Celtics, I have to throw it in there. Sorry, people. Had no business losing. All right, but I'll leave it at that. But the Knicks won fair and square, despite the fact that the Celtics handed to them on a silver platter. All right, I'll shut up now. But in all seriousness, the Celtics were no match for the Knicks there as you got deeper to the series. And yes, Tatum got hurt in Game 4. We understand that. But they had the garden party there in Game 6, which to me was over the top, was too much, as I talked about there a couple of weeks ago. But this Indiana series, what they're going to look at here, and I'm sure when the Knicks landed late Saturday night into Sunday morning, and I'm sure as they mulled over the whole series and went to bed last night and are sure tossed and turned from the owner, front office, head coach, players, trainers, etc., I'm sure in the back of their minds and probably at the forefront, they are still thinking about Game 1. Because if they would have won Game 1, tonight would have been a Game 7. And obviously that's not the case. But the Knicks future does look bright. Now, I'm not going to get into second apron stuff because you have to think about that in this new NBA coming into this offseason. But if you're James Dolan and the way the team is constructed, he's going to pay the luxury tax. He's got more money than God. He's not going to try to finagle or try to nickel and dime this roster. I'm sure he's going to try to bring in pieces that are going to be cost effective. I don't think he's going to go out and break the bank and have to pay zillions of dollars when it comes to the luxury tax. But his team is close. And they obviously have to get a bench. You saw Tom Thibodeau have to dust off guys like Landry Shamet and DeLon Wright to add some minutes and give his guys a breather. And again, that was too little too late. Not to say that Shamet and Wright were going to do anything impactful for the Knicks, but that was just an indication to know that the Knicks need to be at least 8 and possibly 9 deep. Because when you have teams like the Thunder and even the Pacers who they just finished playing, you got to have some length in your roster because there's no way that you could rely on your starters to play 41, 42 minutes over 3 rounds, let alone 4 when you're trying to win a championship. So how I look at it is that the Knicks have Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns. OG Anunoby's making big-time money too. Remember, they signed him to a 5-year, $212 million deal. So I get it. The Knicks may even try to look to see what they could do to pare down a little bit. Maybe not necessarily the payroll because you're not going to trade, obviously, Jalen Brunson. You're not going to trade Karl-Anthony Towns. You just got him. And Anunoby's not going anywhere. But the rest of the roster is going to have to be comprised of guys that are going to make not necessarily the minimum, but obviously they're not going to get paid $30, $40 million a year. So how they navigate that's going to be tricky. But I'm sure Leon Rose, Worldwide West, the powers that be at Madison Square Garden, they're going to find a way to get those 1 or 2 pieces in tow because think about this. Next year, the East is wide open. And it's actually New York, Indiana, and everybody else. Because the Celtics without Jason Tatum, and now I'm already hearing rumblings about Jaylen Brown maybe going to Milwaukee for Giannis, as Giannis may come back, because you got to have to trade those contracts. There's no way that Jaylen Brown's going to stay there. If Giannis goes to Boston, they're going to have to right away part with the former conference final and NBA Finals MVP. So, and who knows that? That's just something that I read. I don't know how true that is, but if the Celtics are looking to try to get Giannis, could you imagine? But with that being said, right now Boston is a question mark going into next year. Same for Milwaukee, whether Giannis goes to Boston or elsewhere. The Bucks aren't going to be the same. Then you have the Sixers, who, although have the 3rd pick in the draft, But Joel Embiid, is he going to come back like the $6 million man, or is he going to be his usual $60 million man? And no, I'm not talking about him getting paid that amount of money, but is he going to be a guy that's going to be healthy and is going to last for 3 rounds over the course of the playoffs if they do qualify next year? And Paul George is a year older. Got to throw that in the mix. When you have teams like Orlando, who are young and on the come up, but are they ready to take that next step? The Cavaliers, 64 wins. They're not going to duplicate that next year, at least in my eyes. So what are they going to do for an encore? And a lot of those other teams, the Hawks, who are that middling team that could maybe make some noise, but who knows? The Pistons, I get it, a year older, year wiser, but are they ready to take that next step? I don't think so. Pat Riley, he may have a card or two up his sleeve, but he does not have a lot to work with down there because it's not as if he's trading Tyler Hero or even the likes of Bam Adebayo. He's going to need to keep those guys, but bring in another part to see what he can do to try to get the Miami Heat back in contention. So the East right now is really up in the air. It is New York and Indiana and everybody else. So what the Knicks do here in this offseason is going to be paramount for them to get back to this point next year and even beyond. And they have obviously the resources, and of course they have the personnel. It's just a matter of getting other personnel to secure either that bench or to bring in that final piece of the puzzle in order for them to finally win a championship that has been so elusive to that organization for now, count them, 52 years. So their future, at least for next year, looks bright. But how they're going to manage the second apron deal, that remains to be seen. And I'll have a prediction and talk about more storylines with OKC and Indiana there on Thursday. I'll give you a couple, though, right now. When we look at both of these franchises, I get it. New York not being there is going to hurt because you're going to have 2 small markets, middle America, that maybe a sports fan will gravitate to because it's not New York, it's not Boston, it's not LA, it's not Golden State, so they can say, all right, finally, something different I'm going to watch. But is it going to captivate the imagination of the sports fan or even of the good sports fan to watch on a nightly basis, or in this case, when the games are going to be broadcast? Because OKC is a monster favorite. I don't know if you saw and I'm not a betting man, as you know, but they are 750. That's their odds. They're minus 750 to win the series, which means that if you pick the Pacers to win, they are pretty much 8-1. So if you put $100 on the Pacers to win, you'll get back almost $800. That's how much of an underdog they are in this series. And both of these organizations, of course, trying to look for their first NBA title. We talked about the Pacers as their second go-around, and obviously the ABA doesn't count. They did win championships in the old ABA, for those who remember. And then the Thunder, it is their first time since 2012 when they lost to the Miami Heat. And this is actually the 5th time in the franchise's history. And of course, that comes with an asterisk because remember, they were the Seattle Supersonics prior to going to Oklahoma City. They had the 2 years where one year they lost to the Bullets and then the following year they won. That was in 79. And of course, in 78, they played as well, the back-to-back years. And then the Sonics played in the 96 final against the Bulls. That was the 72-10 team where Jordan, in his first full year back from baseball, won the championship. So you have those dynamics there. But I'll unpack a couple of other keys and things of that nature because really these two franchises, there's no history between one another other than the aforementioned first time that they're playing in a final against one another, and of course both looking for a title, and a little bit of their background as far as them living in the finals, which they have not. And when you think about it, minus the 3 Seattle Sonic finals appearances, the Thunder and the Pacers both have the same amount of finals here, especially here in this century, considering 2000 for the Pacers, 2025 here, and then 2012 and 2025 for the Thunder. But I'll talk about more of the storylines and even the X's and O's on Thursday's podcast, on top of my prediction to see who will win, as the finals will raise the curtain Thursday night, ABC, ESPN, YouTube, etc. And the Stanley Cup Finals are going to be on TNT. So no ESPN, no ABC like last year. So just to break down the schedules for both: Wednesday, Cup Final, Game 1. Friday Cup Final Game 2, and then the series will shift to South Florida Monday, which obviously a week from today, we'll talk about the series shifting to Sunrise at that point. And then as far as the NBA goes, Game 1 Thursday night, and then of course Game 2 will be on Sunday, but we will reconnect on Thursday to talk about the finals in tow at that time. Now, I don't have any other basketball news and notes to get into, so that will do it for both the fall and winter sports. And now to get in the batter's box as I lace them up, put on the cleats, and get ready to face some live pitching here as we turn our attention to baseball, excuse me. And you had a big series over the weekend, Yankees and Dodgers, and the Yankees did save some face last night, Sunday Night Baseball, where they beat up on Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and that was a bit of a surprise considering that the pitching matchups in the first two games, Game 1 favored the Yankees because they had Max Fried, who was perfect heading into that game. And for the Dodgers, they had Tony Gonsolin, but they were able to prevail after the fireworks in the first inning where Aaron Judge starts the game off with a home run, and then Ohtani leads off the bottom of the first with a home run in his own right. Yankees had a 5-2 lead, but then the Dodgers came storming back. Ohtani hits a second home run over Max Fried later on in the game, and then they hang on to win 8-5. And then on Saturday, where the pitching matchup was, I guess, about even, when you think about it, when you had Will Warren for the Yankees going up against Landon Knack of the Dodgers, and before you blinked, it was 10-0 in the second inning. 4 runs in the first, 6 in the second, and there was nothing much to watch after that. The Yankees only put up 2 runs in the game. Shocker, 2 home runs, solo shots by Aaron Judge, and the Dodgers went going away 18-2. I think it was one of the biggest losses that the Yankees had faced, I want to say, since 2004? Remember when they lost 22-0 to the Indians at that time? So to lose by 16, and I can't recall of a deficit where the Yankees lost by more since then, but now they did lose in a playoff game. No, that was 15 to the Red Sox. They lost 16-1 in that Game 3 in the division series in 2018. But for the Yankees, who were licking their chops and certainly were battered and bruised over those first 2 games, giving up a total of 26 runs, and then with the pitching matchup certainly favoring the Dodgers last night with Yamamoto going up against Ryan Yarbrough, and Yarbrough kept the Yankees off kilter and was very good in his outing. Did give up a home run to Tommy Edman early, but was keeping the Dodger hitters off balance. And then you had Ben Rice, who took Yamamoto to deep center field to make it 3-1. They started attacking on runs after that. And before you know it, it was 7-1. They end up winning 7-3 and salvaged that series against the Dodgers. And to me, that series meant more for the Dodgers in my eyes because they do play in a loaded, not only division, but the National League is stacked, as you know. Yankees, to me, I understand that maybe a little bit of revenge, although, please, you can't get revenge in June when you lost in October to them last year. But I think it meant more for the Dodgers, I thought, and to win 2 out of 3 was good. Now, you would have liked to get the sweep, especially with Yamamoto on the mound, but that wasn't to be the case. So the Dodgers were at least able to win the series and show that they are, at least in some people's minds, that they are the better team than the Yankees here at this juncture of the year. Now, coming in after the Yankees leave town, the Mets arrive into LA for 4 games, which should be very interesting. Now, mind you, they just played last weekend, not this past one, the previous one over the Memorial Day weekend, where the Mets took the back 2 out of the 3 against the Dodgers and actually could have swept the Dodgers after coming from behind there 5-2 in the 9th inning to tie. They had ample opportunities to win in extras, but fell short, and then they did win that series, as I talked about. So now they go into Chavez Ravine for 4. How this will play out, now, you're not going to see Yamamoto here in the series at all, but the pitching matchups, let me go through that real quick. And we understand that the pitching matchups, even if they do favor the Dodgers or the Mets or the even, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be automatic wins for those teams, but it's something to at least look at and to sink our teeth into. But the series starting tonight, where you'll have Tyler McGill, who has not been good, go up against Clayton Kershaw. Oh, that's tomorrow night's game. My apologies. Tonight, Paul Blackburn will get his first start. Remember, he was on the IL. He got traded from the A's last year to the Mets at the deadline. pitched a little bit, but had not pitched since the tail end of that year. You didn't even see him in the postseason last year. Was going to get his first start against Dustin May, who's also on the mend as well. Tomorrow, Tyler McGill against Clayton Kershaw. And then you also have Griffin Canning against Tony Gonsolin. So a lot of those matchups right now, you would think tonight is a toss-up with May, although May has the better upside than Blackburn, and McGill, Kershaw, we understand, a bit long in the tooth. These are pretty much even when you think about it. I'm not just saying that being a Met fan. Now, if you're going to go based on track record, of course, Kershaw, you would think is going to be an automatic, but Kershaw, is going to go 5 innings. If he gets into the 6th, that's as far as he's going to go, because he's going to be on a pitch count at 38 years of age. And then Gonsolin, who has come back off of the IL with his injuries that he's nursed over the years. And you would think, even with Griffin Canning, who has pitched well in a Met uniform, again, that's another toss-up. And then you'll have Kodai Senga on Thursday with the series ending there on Thursday afternoon. And he's going to go up against, is it undecided? No, as a matter of fact, they moved Senga out of that. Now they put Dave Peterson in, where Senga will pitch Friday in Colorado. Because Senga, he's going to pitch in Colorado. I saw Senga there originally, considering he pitched on Saturday, but we understand they're going to give him the extra day's rest. So I didn't take that into account. So for Senga, he's going to pitch Friday in Colorado, where David Peterson, he'll go up against Landon Knack there on Thursday afternoon. So I think it should be a good series. Will the Dodgers get 3 out of 4? Will the Mets win the series? You would think right now it'll be a split. Juan Soto coming out of it a little bit maybe. He hit a home run there in yesterday's game. A lot of power, where you had Francisco Lindor get his 13th home run, and Pete Alonso hit a 3-run homer to get them on the board yesterday as they swept the Rockies. No surprise there, and I'm going to talk about the Rockies in a moment. But for the Mets, this is a big series. This, to me, is more on the Mets than it is the Dodgers, because although I said the Dodgers' biggest series for them against the Yankees, only because of the National League and the way it is, because the Yankees, it would have been nice for them to get 2 out of 3, but would it meant the moon, sun, and stars in the entire galaxy if the Yankees would have won 2 out of 3? Maybe for their psyche, but they're going to be fine. They have a big cushion there in the American League East, as you know. But this one is going to be bigger for the Mets, because now after their homestand where they were 7-2 and they swept the Rockies, now they are in first place by a half game thanks to the Milwaukee Brewers sweeping the Phillies over the weekend. So I'm sure they want to nurse first place. Now, I wouldn't expect them to win 3 out of 4. I would think they would probably be chalk and split this series. But knowing that they're back in first place, and now the measuring stick as they have to go out west to play the Dodgers, and for them, this is a bigger series, because the Dodgers could look at the Mets and say, well, hey, we beat them last year, and yes, we lost 2 out of 3 of them a week ago, so they may want to exact a little bit of revenge. And remember that they just played them 8, 9, 10 days ago. So that's why I think it's bigger for the Mets here. And let's see how they perform. Let's see how their starting pitching holds up here, especially with Tyler McGill, who has not been good, and Griffin Canning, who did not have a good start in his last start. That was against the White Sox there. The only loss that they had over those last 6 games against the dregs of baseball, with the White Sox and Rockies back-to-back. So should be an interesting series. I'll be on top of it. We'll obviously talk about the first 3 games on Thursday's podcast and see how the series will shape up as we get set for the finale there on Thursday afternoon. So that is, and I'll go through the schedule here in a second. Other than that, the Rockies, I have to bring them up. I talked about them a couple weeks ago, and now they are hitting historic numbers to the point where the modern era, and I'm not even going to talk about dead ball era after that, or even with the mound being raised in 68, we're going back to 1901. They now have the worst record in the sport over the course of the first 59 games. And in particular, they're the 3rd fastest to get to 50 losses in the history of the sport, but the first time in the modern era. You got to go back to the 1880s to see teams that have had worse records than the Rockies had over the course of the first 59 games. And that is unfathomable. And to think on top of all that, the White Sox, remember what they did last year, the White Sox didn't even come close to what the Rockies have done. And that just goes to show you how putrid and how futile this team is. They've now lost 8 in a row. Now they go to Miami to start a series against the Marlins, so you would think that this shift could come at some point where they'll snap this winning streak, or losing streak, and start not necessarily a winning streak, because a winning streak of 1 for the Rockies is something to celebrate. Because think about this. The Rockies have played 20 series, and they've lost all 20. They've been swept in half of those series. And on top of all that, they have already had 3 8-game losing streaks, at least of games that they've lost 8 in a row. Now, let's see. We know the Marlins are on world beaters, 3-game series down in Little Havana, and will the Rockies win a game over the next 3? You know I will talk about that, because whether they're 9-53, 10-52, or whatever their record may be, by the time we get to Thursday's podcast, you know it's going to be a point of discussion, because this team right now, they're on a pace to win 25 games, which will obliterate what the White Sox did last year, and we won't even have to talk about the 62 Mets ever, although they are going to be a team that's going to be remembered forever. But with the way the Rockies are going, the Mets are going to look like the 69 Mets, considering what the Rockies have done here. And it's just sad. You know, I'm not trying to dance on their grave by any stretch, but you got to call like you see it. 9-50? So when you double that up, they could be 18-100? You can't even make that up. You can't even fathom it. It's just unbelievable when you, I don't know what else to say. Now, you also have a couple of instances where you have a return from an injury in a one Mike Trout. And I didn't even mention Mookie Betts, who stubbed his toe on some furniture, and you did not see him over the weekend against the Yankees. Betts, day-to-day, although he did fracture his toe, but it's one of those where it must be a hairline, nothing to where he's got to be in a walking boot or is going to be on the shelf for some time. So Betts, I don't know if you're going to see him in this series against the Mets, maybe later on in the week. Something we'll keep in mind there, as we talked about with those two teams going at it over the next 4 days. But you have Mike Trout returning after an IL stint. He had a hit in his return in an Angel win. So who knows? Is he going to be a guy that's going to be a catalyst, breathe some life into this Angel team, which I understand they're fading a little bit, but it's not as if they're out of that AL West altogether. So for Trout, where I think for him, a guy who has not been able to stay healthy and on the field over the last few years, this is an important stretch to see whether or not that he could play a couple of months. He could play maybe the rest of this year and probably be a guy that could maybe lift this Angel team to some sort of respectability. Do I think they're going to be in the running for a division come August and September? No. Are they going to be in the running for a wild card? Chances are probably not. But if they're within 5 games, and although people may think that they're in a pennant race in August and September, if they're 5 games back, but if Trout is healthy, as long as you have him in the lineup, anything can happen. So let's hope that he can stay healthy and be a guy that could do what he's done throughout the course of his career when he's in the batter's box doing damage and doing what Mike Trout does throughout the course of his illustrious career. So we can only hope that he could just remain on the field and play up to his capabilities and not go backwards or regress to the point where he's back on the IL, or even worse, he's not playing well because he's injured, but he wants to give it a go and obviously earn his keep there in Southern California. But again, we'll see how that goes from here on out. Then you have Corbin Burns of the Diamondbacks, who had to leave the game yesterday after 5 innings with right elbow discomfort, and I know he yelled in frustration. An MRI today, who knows if it's going to be costly to where he may lose the season and part of next season. And remember, he was an import from the Orioles, where he signed with the Diamondbacks in free agency, and the Diamondbacks have hit the skids here recently. They have not played well, and for a team that went to a World Series 2 years ago and was this close to making it to the postseason last year, and we understand they have good pitching on the team, the Zach Gallens of the world and the other guys in their rotation who are certainly stout, and certainly a team that if they pitch well, they could do some damage. The Merrill Kellys of the world. But for Burns, who is an ace, if he's not going to be on the roster this year because of this elbow discomfort and he's going to have to go down with Tommy John and have that surgery, then who knows? They could be a team that could be out to sea before you know it. considering how competitive the NL West is and obviously how top-heavy it is, that the Diamondbacks may not even come close to a wild card berth, unlike the last 2 years when they, like I mentioned, got to a World Series and literally were tied with the same record with the Braves and the Mets, but because they didn't have the tiebreakers, they were on the outside looking in. So those are the only news and notes I have of baseball here over the last few days. Let's take a look at the schedule. Starting this week, Colorado, Miami, as I mentioned. The Angels are in Boston, so we'll see what Trout does up in Beantown. And I believe that's going to be for 3 days or 3 games. Then you have the Brewers in Cincinnati. I know, tough for Ellie De La Cruz, whose sister passed away over the weekend, and condolences go out to he and his family. But hit a home run as he didn't even leave the team to be with his family. He stood there yesterday and hit a home run in Wrigley Field. So dedicating that to her, which was obviously a great moment for him in a time of sadness. You have Houston and Pittsburgh, Chicago, the Cubs and Washington. Guardians and Yankees, you got a good series there, which starts tomorrow after the Yankees have a day off today. Then you have Philly and Toronto, Arizona and Atlanta, Texas at Tampa, Detroit at Chicago, the White Sox. You have the interstate rivals, Kansas City and St. Louis, Baltimore at Seattle, San Diego at San Francisco, and that's a 4-game series. So we'll take a look at that. Let me see if any of these other series are 4 games besides Mets, Dodgers, and San Diego, San Francisco. Is Detroit, Chicago a 4-game set? That may be. Minnesota Athletics. No, I think those are the only series that are 4-gamers. So we'll just keep that in mind as we move it along. Yes, Detroit, Chicago's 4 games. Minnesota and Athletics are a 4-game series as well. So we'll certainly be on top of that. But as far as the standings real quick, we know what's happening there in the AL East, although the Blue Jays have played well and they've won 5 in a row and they've cut into that deficit a little bit, even though they're 6-back and 5.5, 6 in a loss, 5.5 back of the Yanks. And I believe they play each other next Monday, so we'll keep that in mind as we move it along. But Yanks have a cushion. Tigers the same, 5 in a loss, but 6 over the Guardians, 7 over the Twins, and 8 over the Royals. Then in the West, Seattle still leading the division, although by a game and a loss, half game ahead of the Astros, followed by the Rangers and Athletics and Rangers and Angels. Athletics are 10 back. Mets, as we talked about, the slimmest of margins, a 1-game lead over the Phils. Cubs over the Cardinals. Now 4 as they're 4 in a loss and 4 games back. The Cardinals of the Cubs. And even with the Brewers sweep, and they've won 7 in a row, because remember, they also swept the Red Sox last week. They haven't been able to gain a lot of ground. They're still 6 in a loss and 5.5 back. And then Padres-Giants. Padres a game ahead of the Giants. 33 and 24, 33 and 26. Those are the records of the Padres and Giants, respectively. So let's see what happens. Whether the Giants will leapfrog over the Padres before it's all said and done, or the Padres hold their tune of being in second place, which they're currently 2 behind the Dodgers at 36 and 22, which lead the NL West. And that covers it. That's pretty much baseball there with the schedules and what's happening this week. So you know I will be all over that. Now let me break out the tennis racket and get on the court here, where we'll wrap up with the French Open. And the French Open is going to be intriguing. Now, not a lot of upsets over the weekend. Nothing really to discuss, but you do have a scenario where a lot of the heavyweights are still in play here, both on the men's and women's side. Now, we know about the upsets there last week with Daniel Medvedev and Emma Navarro and Taylor Fritz, but you still have a couple of Americans there, Tommy Paul, as well as Francis Tiafoe making it into the quarterfinals. So you have that to look forward to. And the women's looks like it's going to be riveting, to say the least. And let me bring up what the matchups are going to be like here over the course of these next few days. Now, I'll start with the men's. I know Carlos Alcaraz was generous. He gave back one of his points there yesterday when he beat Ben Shelton. And now he'll go up against Tommy Paul here in the quarterfinals, where Francis Tiafoe will go up against the Italian Musetti. And those matches will be tomorrow, where today as we speak, you have Alexander Zverev, and the winner of that match is going to, in all likelihood, face Novak Djokovic, who's going to go up against Cameron Norrie, and Norrie is the one that beat Medvedev earlier in this tournament. So a Zverev and Djokovic match would be interesting. Then you also have Jannik Sinner. He'll go up against Andrei Rublev at 2:15 today. And chances are he may go up against either Bublik or the Brit Draper, who is a guy that maybe is on the rise here when it comes to not only just this tournament, but tennis overall. So we'll get to see what's going to happen there. So the men's, fascinating, because you still have all the heavyweights. You have Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, even guys like Tiafoe, not a heavyweight, but from an American side, he as well as Tommy Paul and Alexander Zverev, a guy who always seems to be the bridesmaid or a step below that, but he is ranked number 3 in the world. Draper's ranked number 5. So you do have guys, and Rublev, although 17th, but he is a guy that is also very good. So still have a lot there, and by Thursday, we'll certainly see how the men's side will take into shape. And I'm sure they're going to have some riveting matches here, again, as we get through this second Grand Slam of the year. And then as far as the women's side, and that's been very interesting because you've had Iga Świątek now looking to get to that next level. She has performed well here throughout this tournament, and even though this is her surface, she's won 4 of the last 5 years, but she has not played well heading into this tournament, but she's done well here last week heading into this week, to where Świątek beat Elena Rybakina last week, and she actually trailed in the first set and came storming back to win, which now she'll face Alina Svitolina, who beat Jasmine Paolini, the runner-up last year at the French, and also had to do that in come-from-behind fashion, where she lost the first set and then won the last 2, including the middle set and a tiebreaker. So you'll have Świątek, who will go up against Svitolina, and in that bracket, you're going to have Aryna Sabalenka, the champ, or the number 1 ranked, she wasn't a champ, dating back to last year, but you have Sabalenka go up against Qinwen Zheng, the woman from China, and she's also a very good opponent. So with Sabalenka, Zheng on the side with Svitolina and Świątek, I'm sure a lot of people want to see Sabalenka and Świątek to play in a semifinal. And then in the other bracket, you have Madison Keys, who coming off of the win there down under. She's going to go up against Coco Gauff, where now Gauff, let's see. This, as I mentioned at the start, Gauff has to show you something here, because ever since she won the U.S. Open 2 years ago, she has not done well in these majors. And now it's in front of her. Now, Keys is going to be a tough out here, as we know. But then you also have in the other bracket, you would think, whomever comes out of Keys and Gauff, you have, and I never even heard of the French woman, Boisson, and she's going to go up against the 6th-ranked tennis women's player in the world. And the one, let me get her first name right, because you know me with these names, people. And that is Mira Andreeva. And she's from Russia, so she's ranked 6th. If Andreeva wins, she's going to go up against either Keys or Gauff. But to me, and this is no shade on Andreeva, whomever comes out of that Keys-Gauff match, chances are could be in the final, either against Sabalenka or Świątek. Now, of course, we may see Svitolina, or we may even see Zheng there when it's all said and done. Now, this is just based on maybe just gut, not maybe gut. This is based on gut and maybe what I think will play out here over the course of this week. And we all know stranger things have happened. So here I am thinking, just like we talked about, the start of the playoffs is going to be Boston and Cleveland in a conference final. And obviously, it was Pacers-Knicks, where we could talk about, oh, it's going to be Sabalenka or Świątek against Gauff or Keys. And then watch it end up being Andreeva against Zheng in your French Open final. So, to me, some excellent tennis that's going to be played here. Again, a lot of the big players are still here, and this is what you want. I get it, the Cinderella, the player that's either unranked or the player that's in the teens or even past that was not on anybody's radar to get to this point is great, but you want to see the big players play here. And they're all here ready to take on what this week is going to entail, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited to see what's going to happen here on both sides, men's and women's, and all the draws that are left here in the quarterfinals and beyond. So come Thursday, we're going to have a better take and a better feel as to what we may see heading into the weekend with the French Open as we get set to start coming down from 30,000 feet and get to land this plane. We'll be at 15 come Thursday, and then obviously next Monday we'll reconnect and recap what had taken place at Roland Garros, as I'm sure it's going to be riveting and thrilling as we head into this week and obviously what's ahead for the weekend. Besides that, no NFL. I know there's some rumors there with John Smith going to Pittsburgh. I don't think that's been finalized, although I have some questions about that. But when it's finalized, I'll talk about it maybe come Thursday. And despite that, that's what I have, people. Another episode just about in the books as always. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for carving precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the toy department of life called sports. And if you haven't done so, as I always say at the very end of these podcasts, please, people, I implore you to subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review. That will increase the visibility of this podcast to let people know what is and who is JAYREELZ and the JAYREELZ podcast. And if you haven't done so, please go to my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ podcast, or on Instagram, JAYREELZ as well. The YouTube channel, I keep plugging that and pushing that, people. I'm trying to get that little engine I could to 1,000 subscribers. I'm right now at 638. Whatever you could do to subscribe, be a part of not only just what's going on in sports as I detail day in and day out, but also some lifestyle content. I have some other things in the works as I've talked about here over the last few weeks. So please subscribe to the channel, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And obviously, if you have a question, comment, or suggestion, hit me up at those aforementioned websites, as well as, or social media accounts, as well as JAYREELZ.com. That's the website. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. And then the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. As I like to say, I quit my job almost 16 months ago to pursue this full-time, to try to earn a living, which I haven't really done so, people. So please, this is where I need your help. Take a screenshot, send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies. Put it on socials. Send it to me, tag me. I'll put it on my socials. Remember, word of mouth is just as good as advertising. And it's me not only being the independent producer, host, editor, the marketer, advertiser, social media manager, everything. I wear a lot of hats, so it is a little bit tricky, but that's all the smoke that I want. So I need your help to spread the word, pass it along to those who like sports, love sports, and is just over the moon about sports. Because as long as I'm alive and breathing, sitting in front of this microphone and camera, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South End, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.